Brian, in the room is Brockport State, Marcia, Buffalo State, Anne Marie, Darren out of New Paltz, working in Albany with the Legislative Gazette there in Johnson. Arvin Didi is in Oswego up on Lake Ontario. George is out on the island at Stony Brook. The man Oz is in the city, on the edge of the city at Old West. Anthony Pulaski from, gosh, hang up on your
Hudson Valley
name.
Community College.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Jesus.
right across from
I
the
was
Capitol.
Delphi was about to leave my lips. I knew it wasn't right, so I stopped. JD Allen is also out on the island with George at Stony Brook. Elmer Holden Ford in the southwest corner of the state of Fredonia. Stephen Kersey up top in Plattsburgh. Matt Schaefer in Albany. Crystal Wunsch, you're joining us from Albany. Kim is on the call from Brockport. I think that's Kim. Emma's in Corning, New York. We just mentioned Corning and the fiery leaves that I got used to when I was working there. The colors exploding off the back of my workplace in Corning, New York. And Andrew is with us from Oneonta. I think I got everybody. Hope I didn't miss anyone. With that, Brian Creech, I'm so glad to have you from Lehigh University. The class is yours.
Thanks a lot, Todd. It's a real pleasure to see everyone today and to sort of know how folks kind of do this work differently all over the country. As Todd mentioned, I'm Brian Creech. I am the chair of the Journalism and Communication Department here at Lehigh University. Just a little bit of background and a bit of a disclaimer. I came in 2023 as an outside chair into a department that had a really strong student newspaper that's integrated into the curriculum, that has been doing community work for about a decade now, with a strong sense of mission. And so a lot of what I'm talking about today is something that was built before I got here, but it quickly became something I spent about 60 or 70% of my job sort of administering and managing. And so what I'll do is I'll walk through a little bit about what the news product is, but then also some of the off the page, behind the scene things that we've been doing in order to sort of keep this running and sustaining, some of the kind of inside baseball sausage making stuff that all faculty kind of are really interested in, but also keep this stuff kind of working within our departments. And so thank you, Todd, for dropping that slide deck into the chat. And I'll go ahead and share what I've got, or share my screen with you all, and then sort of walk you through our story. And then I'm happy to talk through candidly any of the operations stuff, curriculum stuff, whatever questions you have after I present. So everything at Lehigh University, at least in our journalism department, revolves around our student newspaper, the Brown and White. The Brown and White is a 133-year-old student newspaper in the sort of traditional campus form. It publishes twice a week and has published twice a week for the entirety of that 133-year legacy. And this photo here is our most famous and fortunately one of our more generous departmental alums, Marty Barron, who the past several years has been much more of a presence, sort of willing to come and talk and meet with students. But a lot of what I'll be talking about today is largely based in taking this established student newspaper, the culture around it, and integrating it into a community-focused mission, taking a lot of the things that work, focus in on what has been working for a very long time, and basically turning the perspective of the student newspaper outward into the city of Bethlehem, where we're located. And so some just quick facts about us. As I mentioned, Brown and White's 133 years old, founded 30 years after Lehigh was founded in 1894, after some rumblings amongst students who wanted a newspaper, and sort of met with the provost and sort of asked him for seed money to start paying for publishing costs. It was largely a student activity in many ways, until 1927, when a formal journalism degree was founded at Lehigh. Now that degree started, I think, like most campuses of this size, it started in the English department and was largely adjunct to the English department. And so it was essentially an English degree with 3 journalism classes and then time spent on the student newspaper in 1927. Students who work for the Brown and White, or student work for the Brown and White, has been a key part of the journalism degree, a codified part of the journalism degree, much more so since the 1970s. And in that time, the department has grown from about 20 majors to 100, and from 2 faculty to 9 faculty, where we're at today. Um, More than 160 students, including 60% non-majors, are involved in the Brown and White in a given semester. From what I understand, that's a very large number of students who are participating in the student paper, compared to a lot of our peer institutions. And we can get into some details about sort of how we make that happen, and sort of what we do to try and sustain that. But what we have is a twice weekly print product, has website, we have video, we have a social media operation, and even have launched various podcasting products underneath the Brown and White brand. What I want to talk a little bit about, though, is how we take this established product and have built in a community focus with a broader awareness of sort of what's been happening in the media market in the Lehigh Valley. And so we are located in the city of Bethlehem, which, as you can see from the map I've shared here, is right square in the middle of the Lehigh Valley larger region and metropolitan area. Bethlehem is an 80,000 citizen city, which is part of a larger 800,000 person region, which is the fastest growing region in the state of Pennsylvania. But there's sort of three key cities stretched across this sort of 20-mile range: Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, plus several suburban and exurban communities that all comprise the larger Lehigh Valley area. Bethlehem's own local daily, the Bethlehem Globe Times, closed in 1991, leaving the Morning Call, which closed its Bethlehem bureau in the early 2010s. Um, Currently, the Morning Call, Lehigh Valley Public Media, and a digital first startup that's about a year old called the Lehigh Daily all cover Bethlehem in some capacity as part of the broader coverage of the valley in general, but there's no standalone news operation in the city of Bethlehem anymore. Easton has its own standalone daily still, which went digital first about 6 months ago, and Allentown, of course, still has the regional paper, the Morning Call, which is largely focused on Allentown, but but does still, as I mentioned, cover some public affairs and civic news here in the city. Um, and so what we've noticed is that Bethlehem is largely uncovered, but preceding even the sort of drying up of local news in the valley, South Bethlehem, where we're located, has kind of always been a news desert, or sort of micro news hole in the larger Lehigh Valley news ecology. This picture I've shared with you really captures pretty well what the south side of Bethlehem actually is. And so the street that runs through the middle is the main retail district, the mural sort of marking the entry point into Bethlehem, South Bethlehem proper. On the left-hand side, you quickly approach the Lehigh River, which runs smack through the middle of the city of Bethlehem, separating its wealthier north side from the working class south side. On the right-hand side, going up the mountain, is Lehigh's campus. And so this historically working class, underserved community has sort of been sandwiched between the wealth of Lehigh up on the mountain and then the wealth of North Bethlehem just on the other side of the river. The other part of the Bethlehem story, especially through the 20th century, has been the story of Bethlehem steel. And you can see just in the horizon of this photo the old sort of steel stacks and headquarter buildings of Bethlehem Steel just on the horizon of this photo. Bethlehem Steel was the main employer in Bethlehem until things started to decline towards bankruptcy through the 90s. And so from the 90s into the early 2000s, Southside Bethlehem was economically depressed in a way that was pretty intense, even by other Rust Belt community standards. And so this sharp distinction between the sort of lingering ownership wealth that was still present on the north side, and then Lehigh's ongoing private university wealth was really, really stark. And so journalism faculty, faculty across the campus, took it as a part of the educational mission to sort of make that difference and distinction sort of front and center in pedagogy across campus in a lot of different ways. That sort of realizing that we were in a geographically unique and economically unique community at a unique time of sort of economic decline and pushes towards redevelopment, has kept a sort of lingering pedagogical engagement with the community that sort of is all over the campus all the time. Today, Bethlehem is largely recovered from the bankruptcy and decline of Bethlehem Steel. It's very much a tourism economy, tourism, lifestyle, and arts economy, which is fairly robust. It means that the South Side is now much more a site of influx of new wealth and gentrification. Those are sort of large issues today, and a huge Hispanic population, probably the fastest growing Hispanic population in the state of Pennsylvania, is per capita in and around Bethlehem's South Side. Um, but the fact remains, the South Side has never had a dedicated community outlet. And so one of the key things that was sort of articulated to me as a mission statement for the department, but more importantly for the Brown and White, our student newspaper, is that the goal of the paper is to simply be the paper of record for Bethlehem's South Side. And so what I want to talk about for the balance of this time is really how we make that happen and what that practically looks like in the news product, but also more importantly, in and around curriculum and then business and operations for all the news products themselves. And so what that practically means is that all of our coverage integrates regular coverage of the campus with public affairs news about the city of Bethlehem. And so these three stories were all top of the fold, A1 stories on the print product about either voting issues or an ongoing student-led investigation and enterprise into citizen concerns about lead contamination in and around the South Side, or regular city council meetings that either go long or get contentious or have a um, sort of key topic that is a hot button issue in the community. This one in particular is about the removal of a homeless encampment that is underneath a train trestle really close to campus that sort of has brought a large amount of protesting in and among Bethlehem citizens. But it's the same kind of civic public affairs reporting that we train students in and put often front and center in the news product. But the heart and soul of the community reporting we do is more about the lives and sort of fabric of the life of folks who are the neighbors of our campus and sort of who live in and around the community. And so we do a lot of sort of organizational features and individual features, as you can see here. But we also have started to turn column inches and web space over to voices from the community, and letting people write about their perspective in the pages of the Brown and White, like treating the folks who live in the community that Lehigh is embedded in as folks whose voice we want to be part of the printed product. And we train students in approaching folks and talking to folks and bringing them and inviting them in to sort of write about their perspective. We also regularly feature these stroll around the neighborhood kind of features where it's essentially man on the street stories with whatever sort of current local local hot button issue folks want to talk about. We run these usually once a month or once every 2 weeks as a way of sort of training students into doing community journalism. And we sort of send a team out, they talk to people, and we run kind of what they say. It's to sort of just point out what they sort of see. This often leads to stories that kind of help us set a news agenda for our community coverage. And it helps us not shy away from the kind of contentious and often like difficult town and gown relationship between the institution and the community around us. And so every few issues, there is some sort of Lehigh's legacy as either a bad neighbor or the sort of distorting nature of Lehigh wealth, or the way in which Lehigh's like real estate portfolio affects things over here on the south side. Some sort of explainer or more enterprise piece that's about Lehigh's relationship, that's largely driven by conversations students have as they go out and do these other kinds of fabric of the community, fabric of life stories in and among the folks who live around campus. And so we pull this off by really focusing on three parts, or sort of three key things that we think about and administer all at once. There's the actual practical operations of the paper. There's the way the work of the paper integrates with our journalism curriculum. And then there's all the onboarding and training of students that we do. One of the sort of core print products that drives all this and really serves as a strong organizing principle for student work and student time is our community pages. An example of which here came out just at the end of September. But these are special editions that we run that are full of just community reporting that we distribute in and around the city of Bethlehem, but also distribute on campus, but gear everyone who works for the paper towards contributing something to these particular special editions. And that has two benefits. First and foremost, it keeps us honest as a news organization because there's an ongoing regular product that is based in foregrounds community reporting, but it also allows us to organize student production time and student learning around producing something for the community pages. And so it's a really good product to have at the end that students contribute to, but it also structures their experience with deadlines and expertise and story finding, source generation, all the sort of good community journalism that leads to very quickly this kind of product. It also gives us something where we get more experienced students to work with and train new students towards producing these community pages. It's sort of the centerpiece of sort of how we organize everything. It's sort of the manifestation of this commitment, and what we do around this filters out through everything else that then becomes part of the news operation. So, as I mentioned, each issue of the Brown and White contains a mix of campus news, local features, as well as public affairs reporting. We have students who regularly go to city council meetings, students who are assigned to cover events, and then students are also assigned to look for and produce regular business and organization and community group profiles, right? These are all sort of separate priorities within different beats within the paper, right? So we have our news desk, and then there's assigned reporters whose like community job is to go to city council and also school board and other forms of community meetings, as well as in a separate set of reporters whose primary job is to generate story ideas that are primarily about organizations and businesses and features that are about the community around the campus. As I mentioned, I'll talk about our special community pages editions as sort of driving the whole organization. One of the things we have, and we sort of realized gave us sort of leg up when we really wanted to start doing this, and every time we want to do something new, is that we have distribution, which is something that no other news organization has in the South Side. We have about 3,000 print copies of each issue that we can and do regularly distribute off campus and in the surrounding community, just across the river or in the towns just outside Bethlehem. We leave them at coffee shops. We don't have any news boxes, but we leave them at coffee shops and libraries and community spaces and community centers. Free copies that are just always around in the neighborhood and in towns next door, on top of the other 1,500 copies that we distribute around on campus. We also distribute reporting through all of our online and social channels and work hard to sort of push those digital channels in and around the specific geographic area. We experimented with sort of buying geo-targeted ads to drive folks through social to our social programs. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Usually we'll do it around like a sort of pretty large news peg. Election last year is a really good example where we invested a little bit of money in like not more than like $250 into like targeted Instagram ads to sort of drive engagement with student reporting around elections. And that delivered a good deal of sort of off-campus, larger Lehigh Valley traffic to our election coverage and news stories last year, just as one example. Um, I do want to point out, like, we have separate editorial and business operations. Editorial is all based in student participation, curriculum, and some extracurricular style work. Our business operations are handled and managed, through the university with paid staff and then a set of paid student staff who do things like sell ads, help manage subscriptions, help with distribution, so actually deliver papers. We pay, common work study rates for students to work in and on the paper, and then the rest of the kind of admin and management of the paper is underneath the administrative tools of the university. And so it's very much a product of the department where all of the kind of logistics and back end are like any other kind of program at the university. And so we have a pretty unique funding portfolio then that I'll talk about. It's a mix of student activity support for printing costs, which run to be about a $33,000 expense every year, which we also help waylay with our advertising and subscription revenue. And then we have the benefit of a significant amount of endowment funds that have been generated through alumni philanthropy. Um, about 160 students participate on a semester to semester basis, but within that 160 students, there's a core group of 20 to 30 editors and assistant editors who provide some sort of leadership to teams of other students within the organization. And so that is a huge number of student participants. It's also a huge number of student leaders, but it creates a kind of hierarchical, organized, sort of cellular structure. This photo is from just one of our press nights, which is a really busy time here in our building. The entire third floor is turned over to the operations of the student newspaper. It's a large computer lab. It's also a photography and equipment setup, as well as a small video and podcasting studio. But design, writing, editing, everything else sort of happens in and around the third floor all the time. It's sort of a constant buzz of activity at night. During the day, these revert to kind of classrooms and labs that we then use in the delivering the regular journalism curriculum. What makes all of that possible is that we have a regular faculty line that is 80% dedicated to the brown and white. And what that means is that we have a faculty member who we can sort of appoint as essentially a publisher, but also sort of mission carrier for the paper, who integrates into the life and work and governance of the department, but also has the kind of faculty freedom to set mission, to focus on operations, to sort of address, however they choose to use their faculty time, everything that sort of needs to happen with the paper. One of the things that this faculty member has done is sort of use that role as a faculty member to create baked-in weekly training for all aspects of the paper, and then integrating community value and community mission as a part of the pedagogy of what he does in and around all of that. And so, as I mentioned, our newsroom space is in the journalism building. One of the main uses then of the alumni endowment funds is largely goes to supporting and updating our technology and facilities, but we do foresee a day where those funds will then cross over into sort of paying for printing costs, perhaps down the road. But it is the kind of magic ingredient that sort of lets us sort of maintain independence and freedom and kind of let us do whatever we want to do and experiment with the operation side of the paper quite often. Um, One brief thing I do want to mention is just our relationship to the administration. The department university, as I said, is the publisher, handles all the financial administration of the paper, all of our bookkeeping essentially. Um, One of the things that is unique to me is that a very strong culture of academic freedom when it comes to instruction. And so we treat the participation in the student paper as a one credit course. It is very much rooted in the curriculum, which means that there is a large culture of staying hands off of the paper, like happens with any other sort of class or academic pursuit. Um, on the flip side, University Comms treats us like any other news outlet when we talk to them or approach them or try to get anything on the record, which basically means they are not very forthcoming and are often very cagey and are slow to respond. And that often is great. And then students write an editorial about an event on campus that was boring, and then University Comms comes banging down the door asking, like, what can they do to improve the relationship, which is great. Um, but one of the key things about sort of having faculty front line as the advisor and also embedding the paper in the department is that faculty status is a really good firewall between the kind of pressures that admin would put on the paper, so long as the faculty involved sort of have a common understanding of the sort of independence of the paper as being very important. And so the department generally agrees to it. The advisor very much agrees to it. And as the chair and as the front line for this stuff, just constantly remind my colleagues elsewhere in the university that talking to any of the faculty about things you'd like to see in the paper is always inappropriate and not something and not a conversation we'd ever entertain with folks from admin. Um, so our endowment preserves our financial independence in a lot of ways, but we also have a very well-connected and group of vocal alumni who sort of stay in touch and sort of preserve that independence. But this is really how we make it work is in and through structures in the curriculum. Um, all participation in the Brown and White is a one credit class, and we treat it as an experiential learning component to the broader major, where folks who are majoring in journalism are expected to participate in 4 out of the 8 semesters where they're here. It's a course offered for credit and a grade. It does create complications when we try to pay students because there is there are lines here at least about not paying students for things in which they are also receiving a grade. This doesn't mean that we don't try to look for other ways to remunerate students. Excellent participation in leadership or something that we can find ways to recognize with additional scholarship money, as well as more often monetary awards from the university and sort of recognizing that student work. Um, but it is really the experiential learning focus and then the credit structure, which has incentivized faculty oversight of student learning and treating what we do at the Brown and White as a form of student learning. And it means that faculty involved can set really high expectations for the work that appears in the Brown and White and attends to the ways that it fits into the curriculum and then puts a lot of our common pedagogical values, primarily around community engagement, into practice. The other thing it does is that it gives a structure to developing progressive competence over time and increasing expectations for the quality of work in higher levels of that one credit course. This is an outgrowth of a larger curriculum structure here. Various experiential and extracurricular learning opportunities are all attached to the one credit courses. Like if you wanted to join a theater production, if you're depending on the time commitment of your role, you would also enroll in a one credit class for that production. Or let's say that you're on taking on some sort of practicum in line with the business school, that would also be a kind of one credit course. And so there's this larger culture here of just making sure these one credit courses are attached to activity that otherwise would go undocumented. Um, that doesn't increase a student's tuition bill just because the tuition is attached to their full-time status. And so between 12 and 19 credits is still the same amount of tuition so long as their full-time status. And so there's not a concern that that it adds more cost to students. But it does mean that faculty time gets tracked and remunerated in a way that makes all this work very legible to our administrators, which is perhaps the most important part of it. One of the reasons we can dedicate a faculty line totally to the brown and white is because among 160 students, about 220 different full-time equivalencies are generated. And we can say, oh, that is equal to a full course load that faculty in physics are teaching, for instance. Um, the other thing we've learned is that this one credit class makes it really easy for students across the university to join the paper just by adding it to their schedule. The faculty in charge then learns who's registered, and you treat it and all the communications around it like you would any other class. And that's sort of been an added benefit. We have, as I mentioned, a sort of structure that really hinges upon the introductory class, Journalism 001, as a kind of boot camp training and orientation into the life of the paper. So any student wants to get involved starts there, and then everyone has a sort of common training that is laced through with our community values. Um, yeah, as I mentioned, regular time and opportunity for instruction and gives faculty oversight over operations, but also craft. So we can really focus in on and hone the aspects of craft. It also allows for time to develop semester-long professional development opportunities and then structure the class as a form of iterative skills development with, again, community reporting as a competency we want them to take away and as an overall course outcome. Um, it also allows us to bring in mentors for student support, kind of like TAs would. Um, the paper is respected as an experiential learning space, and as I mentioned, course load. And as I mentioned, the course for credit structure really complicates our own faculty's push to try and find ways to compensate students for the work they do for the paper. That's something that we're still trying to figure out. And so really the training aspect of this is really where the pedagogy and the curriculum and the operations all meet the road. It all hinges upon Journalism 001, a sort of boot camp where there's a lot of time spent with the faculty and training students around our values, but also just in the operations and the practices in good journalism, as well as time spent working one-on-one with the various student leaders and more senior student reporters within the structure. Um, the way in which we pitch it to students from the get-go is that the focus on iterative professional development and skills development translates very well into any career at all. And that makes participation in the brown and white very attractive to students from across campus. We're also everywhere you would expect faculty and students to be in trying to promote participation in the brown and white. New student orientations, early admissions events, as well as student activity events, all of these events we have a sort of common presence, delivering the mission and sort of showing the benefits of participation. That's one of the key ways we kind of keep participation high among students from across the university. Um, Having one of the other benefits, and I don't know how much of an issue this is in student activities on other campuses, but we're a private school in the Northeast, and so there's a lot of cliquishness that comes up in and around student activities that isn't a product or isn't an externality to the student paper because of the curricular structure to it. Um, it is also adjunct or a key part of the overall journalism major, where there's a very rigorous set of journalism classes that aren't the brown and white. It's just we treat the brown and white as the experiential component where the skills learned in other classes manifest, and then use the brown and white as a way to put some of the best work from classes sort of out into the world as well. But the classes are still strong sets of skills within and around journalism in general. It isn't that everything feeds into the brown and white. It's that the brown and white is one expectation among many other expectations. So that students don't have to be fully dedicated participants in the brown and white to get a journalism major. Um, it keeps the major wide open. It doesn't pigeonhole that, but it also there is still benefit to participating in the brown and white for majors. Let me point out one key thing here is that the academic schedule really is something that we utilize to put faculty training front and center, or training by faculty front and center in the experience of students being involved in the brown and white. But the main mode of that training has been a kind of collective critique session that is weekly, where a faculty advisor and the editors go through the prior week's print issues, talk about what could have been better, what they did well, and then take those lessons and reflect them back into the actual operations of the paper that then the students go out and produce. And so faculty are very involved in craft, but not content, is what we remind folks. That faculty are highly involved in craft, and we keep that as part of the mission. But we're also very careful about not commenting on or driving or really allowing students to sort of make their own decisions about content overall. And that's how we sort of have kept that independence line very strong, because it's really important that even as the publication stakes some independence between the university, it's also really important that the students produce the paper have some independence from the adults who otherwise like can tell them what to do in other aspects of university life. And we try to make sure that students understand that is a product they have ownership of, and that these critique sessions are very much something that is driven by an individual faculty member's pedagogy. I can talk a lot more about that if you want. All right. So that is basically the kind of 400, 500-foot view of what we have and what we do. I know there's probably a ton of questions, and I'm happy to sort of answer what I can in whatever way and sort of be as useful and helpful as I can be. I also recognize that like we have something that's very unique to our campus and our city, and is partly a nature of just sort of how separate South Bethlehem is from the rest of Bethlehem, but also how sort of unique Lehigh is as a kind of only really school or journalism program in the valley overall. And so we have just kind of a huge playground that we can play in. Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much. Folks, mic's on. Let's open up the floor. Arvin's got his hand up first. JD, I see you in chat. I'll get to yours as well unless you want to shout out. But Arvin, you got your hand up. Go ahead, pal.
Mm. Hi, Brian. It was really, encouraging to hear what you folks are doing. So what I pretty much understand that you have a culture there, right? There's a culture that is ongoing.
Yep.
So my specific question is, you mentioned that there are about every given semester about 160 students involved with brown and white, right?
Yep.
And you said out of those 160, 60% of them are non-majors.
Yeah. On average. Yeah.
About so this number is consistent or is it growing? So what's the immediate and future plan about this process?
It's pretty consistent. It has been about 60% for at least the 5 years I have sort of fingertip data for. Um, you know, I don't know really what is driving it other than probably three or four different things that we do. The fact that there's like a ton of room and space in student schedules for them to add one credit classes for anything like extracurricular that they're curious about is probably a big part of it. And there is a sort of advising culture that tells um, engineering students and tells business students and tells health profession students like go over into the liberal arts and look for things that you're interested in, explore them. And a really easy way to participate is just go ahead and add it to your schedule. And doing it that way means that all of these experiential learning opportunities have to have some sort of baked in onboarding and orientation and training for any curious student from across the board. It's not just us, but it's really anything that a student could then add to a schedule pretty easily. The benefit is that once someone sort of shows up, tries it out for a semester, most of the time they like it and they stick around, and then word spreads that way. And so there's usually like a core group of students in the business college and a core group of students in engineering college who all say like, yes. This has actually been a really great thing. I've learned so many solid skills that have like a career benefit, but also it's just been a good use of my time and a fun thing to do that sort of gets me away from all the calculus that I don't like to do. And that's been the trade-off. But it's large part of the sort of campuses like I mean, this is from the top. It is a part of the do everything, try everything liberal arts mission at Lehigh. That is, what the president says and what the provost makes sure deans and department chairs also like don't create roadblocks to letting happen.
Well,
Thank you.
let's follow up that question with JD's asked, seems to be right in line, and then Stephen, you'll be up next, pal. JD's asked, can you share a syllabus, especially for recurring credits, and how does assessment differ between recurring credits?
Yeah, I can absolutely grab and track down a syllabus for these recurring credits. Um, so there's four sort of sequential one, two, three, four credits that we've developed, and then there's credits for photography and credits for editing, and there's credits for special products and credits for video, and that are all lined up and lined in. But what assessment basically means is there's essentially a number of stories any student that participates is expected to produce over the course of the semester. And really, it's the grading comes down to did you produce, did you meet deadlines? Um, we keep student hands off of any kind of grading of other students, which means that like student editors don't weigh in on what a student does and doesn't give any feedback that could be construed as grading. The faculty advisor, though, does track participation pretty heavily, and that's tracked through, turning stuff in, making sure there have been drafts all along, making sure that there is some form of sort of regular ongoing participation. That's essentially how kind of student assessment overall is overall pegged to. Yeah. Um, and then but I'll track down any documents that sort of clarify that because it is a pretty complicated moving um, it's a pretty complicated system with a lot of moving parts. And one of the responsibilities of the faculty member is to do all of that kind of course management stuff. It looks a lot like running like a 200-seat freshman seminar some weeks with a lot of sort of management of grade books and management of sections. But yeah, I'll track all that down and share what I can via Todd and who can send it out.
All right, Stephen, sir.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Brian. Two questions about some of the numbers to get clarity on them. You said that the cost of the newspaper annually is 33,000, and so I'm wondering, is that funded entirely by the endowment, or are you doing ads, or where's that money coming from? And
No,
then,
that's first off, that's the cost of printing. That is the primary cost, is the printing cost is the 33,000. And that's just last year's bill. That is paid for right now, that is paid for primarily through a student activity fee. We go to or the students go to our student activities and student senate and ask for the costs of printing to be covered on a regular basis. Other costs that are associated with it, facilities, technology. We have some mentors who come through who we pay a little bit as adjuncts who do one-on-one work with students on a regular basis when we have extra money. And then the faculty who are associated with it. All of those costs come from different sources. So faculty salaries, of course, paid through regular tuition. Facilities is all driven and paid for and covered with endowment funds and alumni funds. Technology updates are also covered with those endowment funds. And then we sort of keep a running fund to cover printing in the event that the university decides that paying for printing is not something they want to do anymore. And so the university does pay for printing because so because students from across the university participate, it's seen as a viable investment in a student activity, and so they pay those printing costs, and those are the main operations costs. But anything extra we want to do, or anything we want to do on top of just the cost of printing, comes from those other funds. Yeah.
You mentioned 3,000 copies are printed. Can you break that down on campus versus off campus? And reason behind that question is like, how do you know you're reaching people in the community with this news? Is it
Yeah.
because they're disappearing off the racks, or are you able to measure that based on online data?
A little bit of both. We know that they're disappearing off the racks. We know they sort of disappear pretty quickly off the racks. I think 3,000 or so is the general off-campus delivery. On campus, it's about 1,000 copies just on campus. And those on-campus copies linger a lot longer than the off-campus copies do.
Can I ask a
So
follow-up to Stephen's question? Are
yeah.
you are you satisfied with the audience? I guess going back to your population numbers versus the print, and again, whatever your digital, with the size of the community that's out there, is 3,000 enough? Would you wish it was five? Would you wish it was seven?
I mean, we do wish very much that it was a lot more. I think as anyone does. We do track our digital impressions and we try to do it by IP address and locally, and so we see many more page views digitally than we do in our sort of print distributed product. And so what I think is going on is that the print product is a really useful regular advertisement for the digital product is primarily how I think it's working.
So I guess ask another way. Is it worth it? Is the communities responding to your work, or is it just a bunch of work that you all feel good about doing, but the citizens aren't really engaging in it?
I think it's worth it. And one of the reasons we kind of know that it's working is because when we send students out to talk to folks in the community to do community reporting, they recognize us.
Nice.
Yeah, they recognize us. They know they have read stories and they're very happy to sort of read it and participate. And that's helpful. I think geographically, this is actually kind of a dense part of the city. Architecturally, geographically, we are built on the side of kind of a steep mountain, so there's not a lot of space between buildings, which means that it's pretty easy to get around, and it's pretty easy for folks to get to know each other. And I think that density over here in the community helps a lot.
Who's next? Anybody? Shout out. Arvin again.
I can wait if others have question, but I have one more pressing question, but I can wait.
No.
Does anyone have a question?
Anybody jumping? Marcia's got a question. She's standing up for it. Go ahead, Arvin.
Okay. So you said uh, all journalism majors are required to take that 1 credit course, right? The experiential. So every semester, roughly how many non-majors are taking that 1 credit course? And you said you have one dedicated faculty line for brown and white. So is the same person handling these 1 credit courses as well, or you have multiple faculty?
Yeah, I will start with yeah. So the major students are supposed to take the 1 credit course 4 times, and they do it, and then students who find they don't like it can quit and do something else. Um, and so I think right now this semester we have 40, we have 62 majors who are involved, and they're taking multiple sections. And so they'll take the sort of regular writing section, and if they're interested in photography, they'll also take a photography section. And then they'll take and then if they're editors, they'll take another edit section where they're editors. And so they're actually probably taking 3 or 4 credits as majors in a given semester if they're very involved. There's nothing that prevents them from doing different sections of the brown and white to account for what they're doing. Which means that there's this semester, I think 84 non-majors, or to be more accurate, 84 non-majors, 40, I just had this number in front of me yesterday. I want to say 47 of which are non-declared. And so freshmen, essentially. And what we'll see in the spring is many more freshmen who heard about it will register for Journalism 1 and take that and sort of onboard, and then we'll see where the melt falls from Journalism 1 to Journalism 2. Yeah.
Talk about
And
your
then
endowment. Who does your fundraising, and how do you negotiate that with your all-powerful school advancement team that's very territorial? Or
well, that's the thing. Our school advancement team isn't territorial. They're incredibly collaborative. One of the things that happened is faculty in the department um, on the 125th anniversary of the paper, um, decided to turn that into a years-long celebration and alumni engagement. And it's just the fact that alumni have really positive feelings about the time they spent in the brown and white. Any living alumni who spent time on the brown and white loves hearing from Lehigh and loves talking about the brown and white. And so it was a really easy thing to do 125 years ago was to invite every living alumni to engage with the brown and white in some way, and then to attach a small ask to it. And that's how we built out that endowment. Was a 125th anniversary of the brown and white celebration, where we put the current version of the brown and white in front of folks, mentioned it, and invited folks all the time, and then worked hand in hand with development folks to cultivate major donors alongside small dollar donors to build out the running endowment. And
so
so
the advancement team generally does the lead fundraising for the brown and white endowment?
they did that time. And the way advancement fundraising has worked is folks will get assigned to a project or a part of the campus. And part of the development philosophy is anyone who participates once in anything is likely to participate three more times in something else. And so they see specialized connections back to a donor student experience as a really important part of donor cultivation. And so when there's a long running relationship between the department and our alumni, and sort of really strong feelings, positive feelings about student participation in the brown and white, that made it really easy for to bring in alumni and donor relations. Um, because it made their jobs pretty easy. And they're just, they have their incentives, and their incentives are just about, how many dollars they bring in, not about which projects they bring those dollars in for. And so if we can give them something easy to attach themselves to, they then look good in front of their bosses.
Nice.
Yeah.
Eileen from Oswego asks, is there a journalism minor and a broadcast major?
There is not. There is just a journalism major and a mass communication minor. And that mass communication minor helps us out a lot with brown and white participation, I think, because students who want to major in something else can use the brown and white credits they generate as part of that mass communication minor. So we do have a mass communication minor that largely is something that like marketing and business students are very interested in attaching themselves to. But it at least allows them to get another credential for participating in the brown and white.
So if students want to work on TV, ultimately, they major in journalism.
Hmm. Yeah, they major in journalism, and then we mainly do it through producing video in and around the brown and white. And so there is an entire sort of brown and white video component, and then we try to partner them and place them via internships into television experiences. But like we're not a broadcast equipped program in the same way that other programs are, and we try to be very clear that we're not a broadcast equipped program. We have experiential opportunities with the public media station just down the road, where we offer classes in conjunction with them. They're all broadcast heavy, and we can place students in practicums and internships to do broadcasting. And then we have a light studio. What I mean is like a lightly built studio that accompanies the brown and white, but a formal television. We don't have a television station. We do have a student radio station, but that is squarely within the auspices of student activities and doesn't have a curricular component to it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you just clarify the endowment? You said there's a school endowment, but is there a separate black and white endowment? I wasn't quite following.
Yeah. There's a separate endowment for the brown and white, sort of separate dedicated fund for the brown and white that spins off about $42,000 a year to sort of cover what costs could be. Yeah.
That's active and ongoing. People still participating through the advancement team.
Yep, active and ongoing. I mean, like the big chunk was generated 7 years ago on the 125th anniversary. That was when like the real push was, and then there's still ongoing donor cultivation around it.
Nice.
Yeah.
What else? Oz.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for the presentation, first of all. Really interesting. The first thing is the community pages, it's really interesting. Um, what is the editorial process for that? I'm curious, is that a faculty member kind of curating with the community members, or they are all free to, publish whatever they want? That's my first question. And the second thing is, I'm just curious about the logistics. If you send a student to run a story from the community, there may be some additional costs like the, transportation and some other things. I'm curious if that is covered by the school or is the students by themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. On the cost thing, um, it really is very dense over here in the community. And so from one end of the south side to another is about 2 miles. And then from the river to the unwalkable part of the mountain is about 3/4 of a mile. So it is dense. And so a lot of the transportation stuff is on bike or by foot. Or the bus system that Lehigh runs. And so we're just fortunate that it is dense and we benefit from that. And that's not something we've had to really confront. The community pages themselves, like that is a special issue that is on the calendar, and it is on the horizon. And student editors are sort of trained by the faculty member to prepare for it and to sort of rework operations in order to do that. And so the faculty member sends the student out to go and find voices, find content, find folks who would either be featured as stories or go find news, or to find columns, or find folks who could write column inches for that. And that is, that there's probably 8 weeks of lead time for each issue, and folks start planning and prepping for it, and it becomes part of the weekly budget meetings and reporting process. But it really is sort of putting the onus on students to understand the values of that and to go and do the work and sort of finding the voices that would populate those pages. Yeah.
Right. So not everyone's blessed to have Marty Baron. Not everyone's blessed to live in a tight geographic space where the kids can get around. The 1 credit hour seems like what are some things that any school should look at this first from your success? The 1 credit seems one. Any others?
Yeah, like for us, it was realizing we had distribution that other folks didn't have, and that we could first reach and report for the community, because we just had this print product that we could populate and fill. The other thing that we did is we just made, and this wasn't part of the community mission at all. It was just about getting students better clips in classes. Is we just doubled down on off-campus reporting first and foremost in all the classes, and making sure off-campus reporting was part of any skills class, and that sort of starting then with covering meetings as a really good way to sort of learn all the skills quickly, and then covering events and then doing profiles.
Why do you
class.
think that's better clips? We doubled down for better clips to get off campus. What was the decision that this is better than covering the international affairs department?
The thinking was they'd have to talk to people they weren't already comfortable talking to. That was really the extent of it. That was really the extent of it, is that, one core competency we want students to learn. And by we, I mean like folks who preceded me here, before they were doing community mission, they were doing off-campus reporting. And the sort of frustration is that, students aren't aren't comfortable talking to people they don't know, let's bake that in a clear as a clear skill set to build in the core courses. So sending them off campus doing this kind of like beat reporting in the city of Bethlehem was first and foremost what was really important. So that's where it started, honestly. And then realizing that as students got trained in that and got more comfortable being off campus, we could then like shift the attention in the editorial product itself, if that's helpful.
Awesome stuff. You got to go. Anyone else? Time to pull the plug. Let me know. What are we feeling?
Aaron, you had a question about the faculty hours that I didn't address. Yeah.
You said there is one full faculty line dedicated to brown and white.
Yep.
So is that the person who handles this everything?
Yeah, it's the person who primarily is frontline for handling everything, who handles the sort of 160 students. Yeah. Well, so what we had to do is sort of is really make that person's job clear to administration as an instructional job, and attaching that 1 credit hour class to every student who participates allowed us very easily to say to administration, this is the equivalent of someone who's teaching 2 or 3 very large lecture classes and giving all their time over to that. And so we did that, and then every other bit of time and effort is then sort of is handled however that faculty member chooses to do it. But it translating their time that way then allows for the kind of freedom to do it however they see fit, and sort of respecting their autonomy. Now, it's an incredibly collaborative department. So when it comes to things like mission and things like skills that we can do elsewhere in the curriculum that make the brown and white stronger, we're constantly talking about this stuff at faculty meetings. And so there's one faculty member who handles operations and oversight, but then there's 8 other faculty members who are invested in the mission and are very thoughtful about supporting it through all the other stuff faculty do, like advising and then teaching in other classes as well.
Thanks.
Yep.
All set. Brian, I think I teased you. I saw the Springsteen movie last night, and both of you lived up to the hype.